Friends, at a time when U.S. scientific institutions are being dismantled, including the humanistic inquiry into nourishing diverse ways of being, and when our colleagues are facing harassment and worse at the U.S. border, we are so happy to be able to provide this space where we can discuss outstanding work in the discipline of ethnobiology. This is our second talk of the 2024-25 Distinguished Speaker Series. The final talk will be held at the Society for Ethnobiology Conference in May. We look forward to seeing you there, whether you're returning or coming for the first time, provided that that's a safe space for you to be in. And if it's not, we hope to make sure that it's a safe space for you soon. I want to encourage everyone to navigate to the bottom of their screen, of their Zoom screen, and make sure that if they would like to, they're showing the captions that will be auto-generated for this process. If you have any trouble with that, please send me a direct message using the chat function, and I'll help you out. Given all that, it's my great pleasure then to introduce Dr. Jennifer Grenz, an assistant professor in the Department of Forest Resources Management, jointly appointed between the Faculty of Forestry and the Faculty of Land and Food Systems at the University of British Columbia. Her work with the Indigenous Ecology Lab focuses on innovative plant-soil interactions and ethno-soil microbial ecology that improves the efficacy of ecological restoration, invasive plant management, and ecosystem resiliency, as well as some newer work in wildfire recovery, incredibly important as we examine our political ecological systems facing wildfire and intensified climate risk. Jennifer is a proud Nklakatma woman of mixed ancestry and a member of the Lytton First Nation. Her long-term work has been recognized by a range of peer-reviewed scientific journals and grants, as well as her recent critically acclaimed book, Medicine Wheel for the Planet, A Journey Toward Personal and Ecological Healing. In fact, you can pause this and watch it on YouTube later. If you haven't read this book, go get it right now. It's terrific. I first met and was introduced to Dr. Grenz's work last year at the Society for Ethnobiology Conference in St. Louis, Missouri, where she gave an amazing talk all about the work that her group is doing, and then proceeded to help out a lot of new faculty members and new colleagues to navigate all of this hidden curriculum work and the difficulties of navigating our personal commitments and our professional commitments and being the right kinds of colleagues in the right sorts of spaces, providing not just personal stories, but a lot of really practical resources to help out everybody in that room. And for that reason, professionally and personally, I'm so pleased that she's able to be speaking with us today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jennifer Grenz.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew, for your kind words, and to you and Steve for inviting me to share with all of you. And thank you for taking time out of your day to spend with me. I'm really sad that I will not be able to join everyone at the conference this year because of some of these challenges that are happening between our countries, but hopefully all will resolve, and we'll just continue to create spaces like this where we can connect and do the really important and great work that we all do. And so you can see my screen now. We're good. Okay, perfect. So it's such a treat to be in this particular space because normally I'm having to justify and explain, the importance of bringing different knowledge systems together before I get into the work. So it's very nice to be in this space and not have to do that and be amongst like-minded people. And so I wanted to take advantage of that today by sharing some of the things that have been on my heart and my mind as I continue to do work alongside a number of different Indigenous communities, including my own nation, and hopefully plant some seeds in all of you in thinking about these things in your own work. So the title of my talk today was Who Are the Plant People Today? Strengthening Human-Plant Relationships to Build Climate and Cultural Resiliency Through Ecological Restoration Research. So first, I just want to properly introduce myself, and good job, Andrew, saying our nation. I'm a proud Nklakatma woman. My family comes from the Lytton First Nation, where I'm a member, but we have a lot of family in also the neighboring territories, the neighboring Stetlium and Secwepemc territories. And you can see here, this is a map of British Columbia, and we are known as the people of the canyon, being the Fraser Canyon in the interior of British Columbia, where I'm going to be sharing some of the research that I'm working on in wildfire recovery in that area. So you'll get to see some pictures of that. I'm also the PI of the Indigenous Ecology Lab. Our lab, if you're interested, you can go to our website here and learn more. We work maybe a little bit differently than others in that we work entirely in service to Indigenous communities. And so, working on a variety of ecological restoration and food systems reclamation and revitalization projects, and trying to bring together well-prepared allies, other Indigenous scholars, and grad students to do work that's needed in communities, whatever that may be. So I wanted to start today, when I asked the question, who are the plant people today? I was reflecting on who the plant people are to me. And when I say plant people, I don't mean in the sense that we actually talk about plant people as, plants having animacy in our stories and our belief systems, but also the plant knowledge keepers. I was reflecting on who those people are to me and why I think of them that way. And for me, it starts with my great grandmother, my mom's mom. Is that right? Amy Tricera, who's Inklikatmik here on the left, and then also my great grandfather Bill Swartz, who's Sewetmik. Both of whom had just a glorious garden where probably my interest in plants was born. And I was reflecting on whether they themselves, would consider themselves plant knowledge keepers, and sharing what they shared in the food that they grew. And I was thinking, is it just merely the context that they were in where, out of necessity, you had to know things about plants, to survive there. We have a very short colonial history in British Columbia in particular, and so when all the gold rushers went up the Fraser River around 1858, things changed very drastically. 60,000 extra people came up into our territory, and life changed very quickly. And so they would have been just on the other side of that, and so I just think about, if I asked them today, were you a plant knowledge keeper? They would probably laugh and say, no, we're not, why would you call us that? We're just, doing what we need to do to survive. And I was reflecting a little bit also on, who I consider to be knowledge keepers in my life now. I have the great privilege of spending time with a number of elders that are considered, or I consider, plant knowledge keepers. Their communities considered to be plant knowledge keepers. This is Dr. Arva Charlie Luschim, who I've probably spent the most time with over the past 10 years. But he did something not that long ago that really got me thinking about this whole question of who is a knowledge keeper and where are we on the knowledge cycle, in our careers and our lives. What does it mean to be a knowledge keeper? What responsibilities come with that? And the question I asked him was, we were working on a restoration project in a Garry Oak meadow. And he had shared with me some different things about stewardship techniques with the plant camas. And I said to him, which turned out to be a mistake, I said, what do you think we should do? Like, as in, our restoration action. And he really came at me, fiercely and said, that isn't up to me. That's your job. My job is to share with you what I know. But it's your generation that's going forward and your children. And so what you do with the information that I share is up to you. And I was like, a bit surprised by that answer and caught off guard. And so then my next question to him is, well, what is a knowledge keeper? And he said to me, well, a knowledge keeper, well, I'm a knowledge keeper, and it's because I live it. And that was not the answer that I wanted. It was not clean and simple and easy. I went away wrestling with both of those answers. What does it mean to live it? And is that even possible, within the life, the very privileged life that I live right now, where, I can just take the money that I earn and go to a grocery store and buy my food. Now I live on a farm. I am a farmer. I try to grow as much food as I can, but still it's a decision. It's a luxury for me to even grow my own food. So can I really live it with the plants? How do I live it in this context that then, I can become what he also called me, as a young elder. And that freaked me out, because we spend so much time with knowledge keepers, with elders, with people older than us. And here I am kind of coming to the middle of my life being like, wait a minute, like at the end of the day, and I joke with some of my other friends that I work with who are in this boat, like, it's going to be us, like eventually, right now we're watching all of these, wonderful friends and elders, starting to pass on to the other side, and we're left, and that is really hard to come to terms with and scary. And so I've been thinking about the responsibilities, of what it is to be a plant person, whether you're Indigenous or not, right? We're all holding all of these knowledges, things we've learned in university, from our life experiences, from our professional experiences, shared with us by elders and knowledge keepers or communities that we work with. And I love analogies, and I was thinking about the game telephone. And I realize now my children probably wouldn't even recognize what this is, and they probably have never even played the game telephone, but I'm hoping you all are kind of in my realm here, where, the first person says something and then you whisper it to the next person, and then the next person whispers it in line to the person beside them, and it goes and it goes until you get to the end of the line, and the person says what they heard. And, often this is very funny because what the first person said was not what comes out the other end. And it's either maybe closely related or like absolutely something different. And I was thinking about that in this sort of line of knowledges that connect us, to pre-colonial times, and what would have gone in that receiver and is coming out through work that all of us are doing is like, how accurate or inaccurate is this, and is this really even a useful analogy when it's not just as simple as whispering, and sometimes actually whispering those knowledges onto the next people, but that there were breaks, that it wasn't one person lined up next to each other. There were considerable breaks, through all of the things that have happened and, since colonization and colonial impacts to our communities, to lands, continued impacts upon lands, governed by value systems that, I don't necessarily align with. And in some, cases, we're doing the best we can to kind of fill these gaps. And so this is sort of my visual representation of like what's happened within my own nation. So the starting symbol at the receiver there is a pictograph from the Stein Valley that was interpreted by Elder Annie York, who's below that, as the plant people. And and we were, in those times we would be have such a close relationship with the plants because not only did we rely upon them, but also our protein sources relied upon them, and so there's just this intimate relationship. But then colonization happened and the breaks began. And I think about what is a knowledge keeper. And, one thing I wanted to share is the next image after the plant people symbol, is James Tate and his wife, who was an Inklakatmik woman. And, for a long time, I didn't have a lot of love for ethnographers. I think that's been one of the hardest things even for me to connect with this society, is like this whole ethno thing kind of, just has a little, like, I don't know how to feel about it, but then this past summer, I was helping to teach in our traditional ecological knowledge courses in our language fluency program at the University of British Columbia in the Okanagan. And we were at the Cooks Ferry First Nation, one of the reserves, and there's a monument beside the Nicola River to James Tate. And I stood there for a really long time looking at it, just kind of perplexed. And I've read and used James Tate's work, it's very important. But I was like, why is this here? And I just felt really strange about it. And an elder and leader from our community came over to me. I think you could kind of tell I was having this moment. And I said, why is this here? And he said, well, he preserved our knowledges. He saved our knowledges by writing them down when during, colonial disruption, they all could have been lost. And that was so fundamental for me, so, today I think of like, what is a knowledge keeper? Well, it's an Indigenous elder. But now I look at James Tate with such a soft heart and with gratitude as, a non-Indigenous person who in that moment could fill that gap so that the knowledge could continue to make its way forward. And so, now that work, there's an example right there next to it, and the image next to it is the ethnobotany of Thompson Indians of British Columbia. Something that the hand using that was actually a language student. We were using that out in the Botany Valley this past summer, because we're reliant. And this is where, I want us all to think about, what is our role as knowledge keepers? What are we doing? Are we knowledge preservers? Are we helping to hold knowledges? Are we generating knowledges? What is our role and filling these gaps? And it goes forward from there to elders like Annie York, who, worked so closely with Dr. Nancy Turner, also in that knowledge preservation phase, before our communities perhaps more widely were ready to use those knowledges again, are able to use those knowledges again, in this very amazing time, especially, in the area of the world where I'm living, where there is this unbelievable cultural resurgence and revitalization. We've always been there. We've always been doing our things, but this is, it's so exciting. We're watching young people speak our languages, and I'm out there with them identifying plants. And, so I keep seeing, where are we filling in these gaps? But then the next question is, how do we keep it going forward? And this is the part that's wearing on my heart is, we kind of treat knowledges like they're finite, like it, well, everything you need to know about the plants now. But we all know that, plant communities are changing for various reasons: climate, plant invasion, right? We know that our own people survived changes in speciation, so we can't kind of hit pause on the ecosystem here. So this is where I'm like, oh, what do we do as plant knowledge keepers today to live it, to keep passing it forward, and to also understand all of those knowledges from the time of that receiver going forward to help us understand even what we're seeing on the land today. And that's one of the things that I really struggle with these days as someone who's been in restoration ecology for close to 20, maybe even longer years now. I'm going to reveal how old I actually am. Thank you, Mom, for good genes. We're always treating symptoms. It's a Band-Aid on a problem. And for me, when I see, yes, we have major ecological disturbances, development, logging, fire, people just not treating land very well. But if we think about it in terms of the continuity of knowledge, perhaps it's just that broken relationship between people and plants. And it's not on purpose, it's just we're living in a different context. We're not directly reliant necessarily, on plants in the sense that we need to steward them, grow them, love them so that they can nourish us. We have other options. It makes it difficult. But one of the things that I've been seeing lately, in addition to this, what I think is often a misdiagnosis of what our problems are when we're looking at land, and perhaps why we can't come up with long-term solutions, is also who else is filling in the gaps of that phone cord. And I just wanted to share a story. This summer we were in the Botany Valley. This is the Botany Valley. And you can see here that we've got birch trees that are intruding in the valley. And I should have put a beautiful picture of the valley. I'm so sorry. But if you Google Botany Valley, it'll blow your mind. It's amazing. This is our bread basket. This is where our food is growing. But there's encroachment because we don't have cultural fire, or we're getting it back. But we haven't had cultural fire for the last 125 years. So now we have all this encroachment. So, and then another elder was saying to me, it's really strange, but the plants are changing in the areas where they grew in the valley because the water's changing. It's drying up in places. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's interesting. And then I'm looking at the birch, and I'm looking at intrusion also from, other coniferous species as well. And I'm like, what's going on with these birch? We need to cut these down. We need to get these out of here. If we can't use fire, we need to get them out of here, because that's probably what's altering the hydrology. The easiest thing to blame is climate, but where we are, it's a lot of trees that haven't been burned, right, or encroachment. And the person, said to me, well, we had a scientist here, an ecologist, a very well-known one, that told us that the birch were good. And I said, oh, well, like, what do you mean good? Well, we need more diversity in the forest, and this will help us be more, resilient to wildfire. For those of you not familiar, the Lytton fire burned the town of Lytton in less than 15 minutes on the hottest day, I think, in recorded history at the time. And I said, well, yeah, but trees don't belong in this valley. This is where our root foods grow. So yes, on a level, tree diversity is good, but encroachment by birch is not increasing tree diversity. But because this person had a capital D small r period in front of their name and came from, an academic institution, the leadership listened to that. And I see this happening over and over in different communities that I'm working in, where we have people devoid of any knowledge of historical ecology telling communities how to manage their land because they have a Western scientific education. Most of them don't even know what historical ecology is. So here's my battle cry for all of you is find a friend in ecological restoration, introduce yourself and our field, because they don't know any of this. And so their lens on what is going on with these changes in hydrology and, plants not doing as well anymore. And, all of this is, they can't see it for how things were in terms of pre-colonial baselines. Like if you're talking in this area, we know what they were. What the land is now does not look like that. And so, we can come in and give advice, but we're giving advice where we don't have that connection all the way back to that receiver. And that worries me, So I just also want to say, we have a very important role to play in holding the memory of lands that even our own people, like Indigenous people, don't necessarily know. And this has been something that I have been running into over and over, especially over the last year, is we have had so many other things to deal with in our communities. Some of those, the memory, the pre-colonial baseline, all of that is not carried by everybody, or is not carried by everyone in leadership. And so, we all have roles to play in filling those gaps and being the reminder of, that we are knowledge keepers to help remind us and give us the context so that we can see problems today in their context and give the right advice going forward, not that encroachment is an increase in tree diversity. And I think the other thing that I've run into lately is, not everyone lives and breathes plants. And like I mentioned earlier, we can go to a grocery store and we can get our vegetables and we don't, need to think about it. The context has changed. But I mean, I live and breathe plants. And so I just kind of feel like everybody knows at least something, except when I was on vacation, in Europe a few weeks ago, and all I'm doing is taking pictures of plants, and my friends are completely disinterested. I realized, oh yeah, no, this is me and all of perhaps you, right? And so we have to help people to engage again. But then what I also see is we're trying to engage, but we're not going far enough in rekindling relationship. We bring groups of community members, groups of kids, anybody interested in any kind of interpretation of the environment, out and show them things. But I don't know about you, when I taught my kid to drive, I didn't just kind of like explain it and go over it really quick and said, hey, drive, kid, right? And nor would, my child, maybe my son, but my daughters wouldn't just jump in and drive, right? They would feel nervous, they don't really know. And this is something, I talk to so many people, even within my own nation, who are so interested in plants. They want to learn more, they want to go out, but they don't have the confidence to do it. Being shown once isn't enough, and I realize that, even getting to practice, going out and harvesting together is still not enough. So we have to go, like, in our research projects, in our restoration projects, going beyond simple engagement within, with communities, to helping with practice and empowerment if it's needed and wanted. And so, I'm going to take you now up the Fraser Canyon. This is actually in St'át'imc territory, and I just want to show you how I'm working on these things and thinking about these things in the work that we're doing. So my lab is now working on a couple of different wildfire recovery projects, but the main one that started 3 years ago is on the McKay Creek wildfire. My student, Virginia Ogerly, will actually be speaking about this at the conference coming up. Andrew, maybe you can tell me how much more time I have, because I could just talk about plants and stuff all day long, and I haven't been keeping track. I have come to see in the wildfire recovery game that this loss of or lack of knowledge of historical ecology is sort of planting our next generations of fires. So we have a huge scar on the landscape after a wildfire, and everyone wants to put everything back the way it was because that is the most comfortable thing to do. Staring at a scar on the landscape is really hard to do. And also, sorry, oh, plenty of time. Okay, good. Sorry. Oops. Sorry, I'm just closing my chat there. So, we don't want to confront and look at perhaps what we've contributed to causing. So we're like, let's just get some grass out there. Let's plant the trees. The forestry companies go back, to planting, monotypic stands of the species that cause these fires to start with. And so this is where that continuity, knowing who a knowledge keeper is, continuing to help support and develop the next generation of knowledge keepers is so critical that when we look out, on land like this, so this is just outside of the McKay Creek wildfire where it didn't burn. And, most people would see this and think, oh, beautiful British Columbia, which is on our license plates, okay? And I used to see it this way, right? This is a beautiful forest, but it's not, right? It's not. This is not what these lands looked like in pre-colonial times, and this is not a forest. This is a monotypic stand of interior Douglas fir, and maybe there's a little smattering of pine in there, but that's it. And if you walk in the understory of these forests, it's quiet. It's dead quiet. And there is nothing in the understory, and so this shift had to occur for me understanding from knowledge keepers how these lands are supposed to be, how they're supposed to be maintained. And now I look at this and think, this is a travesty, right? We're not feeding our animal relations, we're not feeding ourselves, and we have planted a giant wildfire risk out on these lands, and now we're just going to do the same thing again. But if you don't have the knowledge of historical ecology, you're not seeing the problem for what it is. I sit on all these working groups where the discussion around wildfire is all about climate. Climate is the scapegoat, but climate's part of it. It's the value systems driving what's happening on the lands that are a major contributor. And we brought up, the need for more diverse forests in this context. And the diversity proposed was that instead of one species of tree, they would plant 3. And they're all coniferous, right? So, we're like, okay, we're planting, again, the next generations of fire. But they can't see that. The discussion, again, is around, it's always around climate. And it's not around whether we should be doing this anymore in these places, and what the historical ecology can tell us about smart planning, going forward. And so, these are a couple more pictures where perhaps we're also not seeing, some of the impacts as well. We've got a lot of logging and cut blocks. And then on the right there, we have sagebrush intruded lands. Again, cultural fire was a huge part of Shtutliam Nation, just like my own nation. And it is fire suppressed for the last 125 years. And now we have highly flammable plants everywhere, but this is normal for everyone now. Even I've taken community members out and they're like, oh, I love the sagebrush, it's so lovely. And I'm like, well, yes, it's an important plant for us. It shouldn't look like this. So even our own communities are losing that continuity, that knowledge to know this is a symptom of a problem. This is a symptom of our loss of relationship with land, but these are the shifting baselines. This is the new normal, even for our own communities. And so, my lab is working with what we do with these high intensity fires, highest degree burns, and sort of, how do we turn moonscape back? What do we do? How do we do this? And the thing that I'm learning is nobody knows. We're all just trying to figure this out. We have forestry companies just planting trees into ash. The plants are all dying. It's very, this is very, very difficult work, but, I see, in the devastation, hope, and an opportunity, not that there's a silver lining to the absolute devastation that's been caused, but we can do things differently. We can go, think about all of our knowledge keepers and that continuity, and think about what were the pre-colonial baselines. How were these lands managed before? And this is where people like you come in to help, right? But then also empowering our leaders for tomorrow, not even my generation, but the next and the next after that, to take it forward, and that we're going beyond engagement. And so, for us in our lab and the work that we're doing, it's in yes, we're using Western scientific tools and analyses, because for us, knowledge is power, data is power. When we're talking back to the government, we can speak in their language, right? But our questions are a little bit different. And this is what Virginia will talk about in her talk at the conference is, so we're out there with the knowledge keepers, older generation, the land guardians now who are, knowledge keepers in training, and changing our research questions to align with their values, to align with what the future, what we want the future to be, and thinking about how we further engage and get people beyond the elders and knowledge keepers who are informing us, but that practice for the next generation, for people like me who are going to be left being the knowledge keepers, how do we continue gathering plant knowledges? How do we gather knowledges for what to do on a post-wildfire landscape? And I was like, what do we do about plants? Like, no one cares about plants, you know? And I really was drawing inspiration from, this is my distant relation, Brenda Wacom, who also finished her master's degree in our lab as a member of the Cooks Ferry First Nation from the Inklakatmik Nation. And she did a project assessing protein sources in our territory. And there's always a lot of focus on animals, right? I think animals are just, you know, they're just more attractive, more interesting. Everybody loves a fuzzy creature. But it's also the first thing I think people often think about when they think about Indigenous peoples and our foods, right? They think first salmon or, you know, fish, seafood, and then, you know, game. The plants are always left, but, you know, the plants were 60% or more of our diet, but that always gets left out. But there's been such reclamation and revitalization in our protein space. You know, I was kind of taking inspiration from the work that's being done. And so one of the graduate students in my lab, Nina Andruszek, who's also going to be presenting at the conference, you know, is doing a research project as well on mule deer in the post-wildfire landscape and working directly with the hunters. And this is where I see a lot more knowledge keeping happening and translation happening from generation to generation. You know, the hunters, regardless of age, know every bit of their territory, know what's happening out there, know what the deer eat, know where they go. I mean, it's just amazing. Like, they know everything that is happening out there. You know, and so I've been challenging them, like, okay, well, what do you know, these animals you know so much about, what are they eating? Where are those plants? Like, you are plant knowledge keepers too. And they're like, ha ha ha, no, but they are. And, you know, but we need to, you know, get this kind of interest and excitement into the plant foods, you know, and how we bring that stewardship back. And get people out on land, because we see this practicing, and I'm sorry if you're a vegetarian, but you know, we see this investment in spaces for processing, you know, protein sources, for practicing, for learning, but I just don't see the same thing happening at the same level for plants. You know, I've been out, you know, I do seed collections with folks and food collections, but we're not necessarily talking in practicing the stewardship practices associated with that. You know, right now we're doing a little bit of cultural fire stuff, but like, we don't even know some of the stewardship practices associated with a lot of these plants either. And so, you know, we're just scratching at the surface, but we're also trying to help, like, how do we plan areas in post-wildfire recovery where we don't want the next generation's fires? We're seeing the return of berry patches that elders are telling us about after the canopies opened up. How are we maintaining those? How are we mapping and planning the land differently and saying, no, we don't want forestry in this spot because these are berry patches for the bears over here and these are the berry patches for the humans over there. But we need knowledge keepers with confidence to assert these things, you know, often to the government who manages our lands. And so, you know, this is where I've seen, you know, in real time, you know, bringing together people to get out and get to know the plants, but they continue to not see themselves as, you know, future knowledge keepers or knowledge keepers now. And I, you know, I don't know what the answer is at this point. All I know is the things that we're trying to include in our research, you know, even if funders kind of fuss a bit, that, you know, it's not just community engagement, but it's practice. It's availability of places that are highly accessible. It's getting people to learn how to harvest, promote the presence of all of these things, reclaim and understand what's going on in the land in real time based on what they're seeing. What do the plants need? A lot of people can't answer that question. I can't even answer that question yet for a lot of different species, but we're seeing, you know, our language fluency programs start to get engaged with stewardship, which is so important because our languages hold a lot of those knowledges. We just haven't found it yet, or we're starting to find it. And, you know, we're producing resources and stuff that help to get people out. But again, it's like that next step. So this is just another example where we were harvesting different lily species and root foods in Botany Valley using digging sticks here that you can see. This is Elder Bev Phillips on the right, and teaching people how to use the digging stick to put it in the ground and to pry the root out. But the ground was hard, like you couldn't even penetrate the ground very easily. And you can see in these pictures this very dense thatch layer, and there's a lot of soil compaction then that's associated with that. And I was talking to Bev, do you remember when you were younger, when you were digging, was it this hard? Was it this hard to do? Because a bunch of the students were like, who would want to do this all day? Like you'd get like 5 potatoes, And she said, no, the ground was soft. It was like butter, well, why? So then I started to talk to the group about, instead of just, this is hard, think, why is it hard? Humans are, I wouldn't say naturally lazy, but like you would not keep your farm or your soil conditions such that it was difficult to harvest, right? So then now they're seeing, oh, this thatch layer is a huge problem. This soil compaction is because of our broken relationship with land. We're not harvesting here enough anymore, or had this long break where we didn't, that has caused these conditions. So how do we, instead of thinking like, how do we restore the Botany Valley? No. Because restoration ecologists will be like, look at all the blooms here, like look at the diversity of plants, nothing needs to be done here. But that's wrong. This is just the legacy state of what is possible. And this is evidence of broken human relationship where we still have a chance of repairing it, and then maybe seeing something that is beyond, our wildest imagination today. And this was just some of the soils and structures that we were looking at associated with this compaction. The other thing that we're engaged with is, creative ways to get kids involved in what we're doing. And so, in this case, one of the issues with wildfire recovery is the disconnection of critical habitat, especially for mule deer. So in this case, their winter range, which already was significantly degraded and fragmented by forestry and other fires, and now you've got more fire and fires next to fire. And so, how do we get that back and connect these areas? And that is, so this experiment that was led by Statlium Government Services was to create seed balls from mud and soil from the Fraser River with seed that was collected on the land. And then you throw the seed, and so that's kind of fun, right? I have visions of like slingshots and all kinds of things, but the kids from the schools came and got involved. And this is how we're getting them early, right? Like that we have a responsibility to train the next generation of knowledge keepers. This isn't simple engagement. I'm sure the teachers really were grateful to have the break, and kids love getting muddy, but this is also about, from an early age, becoming plant knowledge keepers, knowing what these seeds look like, knowing what our role is in continuing to perpetuate their populations, that our interventions and our stewardship is required, that the land is not natural. It's not just set it and forget it, that we have to be active in that. And so, this was a way to help do that. And this is the practice that I'm talking about and empowering. And I think this is also where it's important for us in these spaces to talk to the kids about being knowledge keepers, that they can start to put that in their mind and not end up like people like me and even my friend Kwistanakin from Cowichan Tribes, Jared Williams, where we're joking like, oh my gosh, we're going to be it. We're the knowledge keepers. What? Like we never grew up thinking that that's what we were going to become, right? But maybe we would have done a better job preparing if we had been told from a young age. And yes, we have protocols around that in our families, and a lot of that's being reclaimed, but it just wasn't even in the realm of possibility. It wasn't. But I think now, like, my own daughter is very interested in plants and has been from a very young age, and having ownership of that. She will say, I am a plant knowledge keeper. I'm very proud of that. That's not bragging. That is, she is doing the work and takes that seriously and has since she was young. And I think that's where we just need to go that little bit further, like that next generation. What are we doing to empower you going forward? And I just wanted to show, I think Nava Sachs is on here now. We're bringing Western science together with, these engagement projects and empowerment projects with kids. We did germination tests on our seed balls. I know Navas is working on a report associated with that. There she is in the reflection. In our lab, the plant names are the names of the language from the territory that they come from. This is also how, as knowledge keepers in this particular context and time, we're moving on from classifying plants in Western scientific ways and getting to know them as the communities know them. And I will tell you so many times now, depending on where I'm working, I am forgetting the English names of plants, and I've never been prouder of something ever. And then also we're working on some inoculation stuff, which I think Vanessa Jones will be talking about at the conference as well. So this is our teaser for the conference from the lab. But one final project I wanted to show you, I talked about this a little bit last year, but now I get to show you some of the exciting progress, is the Cowichan Estuary. We're working on a huge food systems revitalization project with Cowichan Tribes, the Nature Trust of BC. This is what we started with, was farmland that was stolen and farmed in sort of the Western sense for many years. And now is home to a 5-acre Cowichan plant nursery, with purpose being that these plants will provide the source for the rest of that property to be planted out. The dikes are supposed to be coming out. This is one of the largest estuaries on Vancouver Island, if not the largest, with 2 rivers coming out here, and restoration needed in other places. But this project has brought the community together in such an amazing way, but people have their hands in the dirt and they feel responsible for it. I'm just seeing I don't even know how to articulate what it feels like to watch community members, be in this space and learn, watching them learning from their elders, passing on that knowledge, passing on the knowledge to others the next time that they come out. And it's just, ordinary research projects would not have made room for this kind of thing. They would have asked us just to do our report and model, what plants belong when the dikes come out, and, use elevation models to predict where the plants should be. And we might have done a map, to provide to the nation of the culturally important plants, and we would have called it a day. But instead, we are finding funders who are willing to understand the importance of bringing back those relationships, and doing what I believe to be the most important work, as opposed to, some of the other scientific, questions that we're answering that end up being read by 11 people in a publication on a, shelf somewhere. And I think that's, when I go back to, as I'm closing up here, to that phone and that line, is like, what, if your role is a holder of knowledge because you research, something to do with, in the realm of historical ecology or whatever, and you work alongside a nation, what knowledge are you holding in your brain and your heart that you have not told a youth from that nation? How are you making sure that you are giving those knowledges forward, and also understanding that it's okay, and this is something that I've realized too, as a guest, especially working with Cowichan Tribes, who I've worked with for a really long time. I am a guest on that territory just like anybody else, but I am working myself out of a job. That's my job. I don't want to have to come and do these things anymore. I mean, I would, because I love everybody, but like, I want to work myself out of a job. And I guess my challenge to you, no matter what your contribution is in this space, is, are you doing that? Are you passing that knowledge on to the next person? Are you empowering that next generation of knowledge keepers? Are you encouraging them to live it? Are you providing opportunity for them to live it, right? So that they can understand changes in speciation. They can embrace new plants. Like I asked Luce Chim, I said, how do we find the new medicines? And he laughed. He said, well, you have to live it. But right now, I think to myself, well, the only new plants that I know and I've interacted with, I have called invasive. And I've spent my career killing them, and now I'm rethinking that a little bit. So I just, I hope that I can plant seeds here, but this is just another example. This is coming up next week. Nava's been organizing this, but we've got our nursery care root camp, we've got transportation for members to come out, we're feeding everybody, we're providing payment, we're providing, opportunities, like that this is community driven, this belongs to community, it doesn't belong to us. And so, yeah, so I hope, when I think of like, who are the plant knowledge keepers today, it's the people we're mentoring. It's, and we have to be really clear that we are giving things forward all the time in our work, and that changes over time. Our communities are at different levels of healing, at different places, ready for knowledges, ready to take it on, all of these things. Like, we have to be working ourselves out of jobs. And I think that's our greatest possible accomplishment. Thank you so much, all of you, for spending time with me today. And I appreciate Andrew plugging my book, but I just thought I would put this up in case some of you are interested in finding out some more about it. In Canada, the paperback comes out in May, and it's been a national bestseller in Canada. It's taken a little bit longer to get footing in the US, but hopefully some of you can help with that. But with that, I will leave you and say thank you. And I think we have time for questions, Andrew? Yes, okay. All right, I will stop sharing my screen.
Well, fellow plant people and fellow advocates of historical ecology, to the next ecologist you meet, we do have some time for questions. Please feel free to write them in the chat, or just to simply turn on your camera and unmute yourself. Dr. Grenz, we have a question from Lauren Bostwick, which I'll read for the group. Hi, Dr. Grenz. You mentioned the term historical ecology. What exactly is that? How can someone like me or my friends, undergraduates, amateurs, get engaged and interested in this field or other forms of knowledge keeping? Thanks for this talk. It's really cool.
Thank you, Lauren. So I need to just qualify myself or unqualify myself. I am not a historical ecologist. So, or maybe I'm like, I dabble in it. So I'm probably not going to define this exactly as such, but when I can tell you what I mean by what I'm saying, which is examining multiple lines of evidence to understand, for me, what I'm interested in is what happened to the land over time, particularly with the relationship between Indigenous people and their lands. So before colonization and even through that process, right? So it's, so how do you get engaged and interested in this field? Well, this is the right society to be engaged with. There's absolutely brilliant people who have changed my life and opened my eyes as a, former, perhaps shooting in the dark restoration ecologist. Or at least in their validation of, things that I learned, teachings that I learned and carried, but didn't know how to bring together with the work that I did. But I would certainly encourage you to, engage with people in the society, look them up, read their work, and just start to, understand the places that perhaps that you are looking to bring healing to or help with, but understand what happened on those lands before today.
There's a follow-up on that from Elizabeth, which says, just to add, what are the methodologies ideally used for this type of research, especially for folks in scientific academia where species and climate models are more generally used?
Wow, that is very lengthy. um, but I can tell you, perhaps like in my own experience, working as a restoration ecologist for many years, I would go out into the field mostly alone to assess, disturbance or an ecosystem from that vantage point. Now, I would never go out by myself because there are so many lines of evidence that bring a grander context to what's going on. So as an example, now when I'm out in the bush, I'm hanging out with an archaeologist, right? A good one. And to understand what happened there from their perspective. I'm out there with a soil scientist. I'm out there with an elder, who can also provide oral histories. So these are the kinds of things that we're bringing together. Archaeology, anthropology. It's very interdisciplinary work to provide, I think, the truthiest picture of what has happened in a place. Whereas if I was just, actually a very quick story I could share. I made the mistake of agreeing to work on a federal government project. It was not my relationship with the nation. And I went out onto the land with them, and they had kind of pitched to me that this was an interdisciplinary research project and that the nation, wanted to bring their food systems back. And I had just finished working with, a colleague of all of yours, Dr. Chelsea Armstrong, up at Kitsilus First Nation in the forest gardens, where, that interdisciplinary group of the truthiest possible, combination of what's going on out in the land. And then I went into this government project. And yes, there were soil scientists and entomologists and me, and someone came to do an opening, from the nation. But then when we all walked into the bush, nobody talked to each other. They all just went and did their soil science, went and did their plant science, went and did their entomology. And that it was the weirdest thing, right? Where that used to be my normal. And so that's some of the difference, right? So it's like, I've had so many great conversations sitting over top of holes, right? That an archaeologist has dug with a soil scientist, with a historical ecologist, and talking through what we're seeing, what we're experiencing. So different. So maybe that gives you a little bit of a window.
Folks, I want to flag there's now a bunch of questions in the chat, which is great. Dr. Grenz, please feel free to just tell me to hush up, and you can field these as you like, but I can also continue to field
I think
them.
it's easier for you to read because I'll just get lost in them. Yeah.
Folks, also, please feel free. There's a raise your hand function if you click on the react at the bottom of your screen. But Maria Bruno reminds us that there are a bunch of great historical ecology sessions at the conference upcoming this year. Alyssa Briggs asks, a great question, very ethnobiology question. How does the disruption of human-land connections contribute to larger climate vulnerability? What can we do to repair those relationships?
Right. So I think, some of the things that I touched on in my presentation, like just focusing on wildfire, right? So the disruption of human-land connection, where we have fire-adapted landscapes, landscapes deliberately shaped by fire for various purposes, by my own nation, by the neighboring nations. And then we have fire suppression because other values have taken over the landscape, like forestry as an example, or just fear of fire. Suppression of everything related to us at some point. So the question is, like, what can be done in the future to repair these relationships? This is something I feel very vested in terms of the work that my lab does. So that work that we're doing to, examine things like vegetation trajectories after a wildfire, looking at the impacts of cattle grazing in wildfire impacted areas, using Western science and Western scientific data to come back to government agencies to speak their language is part of that. What can we do and how can we repair these relationships? Like, another one is that we're also capturing data around cultural fire, right? So it's important for us to assert that perhaps we need to do things differently now, which there is more of an opening to do given the state of, like, where we are, where it's fire upon fire upon fire, and there's only so many resources. And non-Indigenous people are also being affected by this, right? Their homes are being, so So we can say, there's another way to manage these lands. Here's how to do it. And now here's the data, in addition to like the historical ecological data, but here's also data to show that this would be the best way to go forward. And so we're kind of supporting the reclamation of traditional stewardship practices, you know, going out and asking the questions and collecting the information from the value system that is valued, you know, by our government. You know, even though there are a lot of discussions and engagement on integrating knowledge systems, still at the end of the day, you know, they really love statistics. So.
Kind of a related question from Hadley. What are some of the ways that you've seen to integrate traditional plant knowledges with modern conservation efforts?
Oh, well, I mean, I think anything that is, you know, Indigenous led, like, you know, actually a really great thing that I didn't talk about, that's an example, is related to what you saw when I was talking about the thatch layers and compacted soil for harvesting root foods, right? Um, so I got a call from a conservation group who has helped to restore a Gary Oak meadow, and they began that work like 25 or even 30 years ago. So like, and this is a camas meadow. And so there's barely any camas at the time when they took over. It was full of invasive species. They did this beautiful job restoring the Gary Oak meadow. But then in the last handful of years, the plants are not doing so well. They're just not, you know, with our longer, hotter summers, with longer periods of drought, the plants are very stressed. And so I got asked to come out and see what's going on. And so I'm out there looking, and like you know, no one is harvesting the camas, right? So there's no aeration of the soil. The bulbs are like just crowded together. They're misshapen, they're small. And I said, well, you know, no one's harvesting here, and there's signs everywhere like do not enter. I think I even showed this at the last conference. And now they're actively engaged with the community and have got harvesting going there again, because now they're understanding these plants that they love so much, they're a crop, right? They need to be harvested in order to be healthy and to be more resilient. But this sort of fortress conservation where we're protecting things and keeping things out, you know, that's broken human-land relationship. And as someone who's worked very closely with our park rangers, like, people do really stupid things in the bush. Like, I totally understand this need to be like, stay out of here because you're gonna wreck everything. But we just need to do better at our education, and we need to do better at having systems in place, because we started to have an impact because of the lack of relationship in this beautiful conservation area. And now we're seeing the recovery of that as the nation is able to inform those, you know, people involved in conservation of who these plants really are and how they require a relationship with us in order to be more resilient. So I think that's the best example I could come up with.
There's some related questions from K and K in the chat, talking about how you were rethinking the idea of invasives as new medicines and what that process has been like for you. I think it seems asking as a scientist, but also existentially. And then another related request for examples around how you shift that knowledge paradigm in general to move us closer to something that looks a bit more like the relationships that you're describing.
Right. Yeah, so the sort of philosophy of invasion, like I could rap about that all night. Yeah, I used to be very confident in my assessment of belongingness, you know, based on what I was taught in my education at university and in my career managing invasive plants. But then, you know, you do something long enough and you see that it doesn't work very well in a lot of cases. You have very few wins after 2 decades of doing something. You know, it makes you question things. You know, are there species that are worthy of being villainized? Absolutely, there are. But are there others that are our targets that perhaps are worthy of what I call relational consideration? And I actually have a whole chapter. There's a new traditional ecological knowledge book volume that's come out that was published by OSU in the last month or so that was edited by Laura Jacobs. And I have a chapter on there called The Relational Consideration of Invasive Species. And I think it's just where if you look at risk assessments of invasive species, there's never a section that says what good they could provide. Like no one sort of queries this. And I think that's a start for us. And also we need to kind of have a different view on our ecosystems that maybe we're not hitting the pause button, but very carefully, right? Like I'm not saying let it all grow because I've run into lots of people like that, but I do think perhaps some of the things that we've put targets on, maybe we need to think a little bit differently. And so I'd say I see the follow-up question was like, what is one of the hardest lessons you've learned doing your work? Is humility. When your job is to look only at the things that don't belong, you end up believing your own hyperbole. And so I've had to soften my position on a lot of things. But I think that, perhaps that's some of the wisdom coming from the particular phase in my career that I'm in now too. But I think we all need to allow ourselves those thoughts and feelings around, am I doing the right thing? Because I think I was taught to suppress that and think like strictly that Western science was driving what I was doing and therefore it was correct. So, and maybe that gets us into the next part was that, what are examples or experiences of helping to shift knowledge paradigms? I think I think this really depends where you are in the world. Like we are in, like I feel like in some respects we are very spoiled. Where we are in the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot of openness and engagement with Indigenous communities, in this space. So we are seeing a lot of Indigenous-led, a lot of alongsideship in restoration initiatives. And so it's not so hard of a sell as it used to be. That said, there are a lot of academic spaces that, where there are people that roll their eyes at people like me. But I think I've also, hit a point where I'm very unapologetic about this. And I think that the way that we're working, where we're bringing together the tools of Western science, but probing things a little bit differently in terms of the questions that we ask, we can show the power of it to the people that are skeptical. Like one of the things that my student Virginia will talk about at the conference is like we reclassified, when we were looking at vegetation trajectories after wildfire, we used kind of classic plant classifications of native, and non-native to understand what was going on. And then instead we used what we called cultural plant classifications based on like things like mule deer preferred species, getting a little deeper into the values and got very different results than what we got if we just used the classical interpretation, and how that's already being perceived by government as, whoa, this is a lot more useful. This is a lot more helpful for us in terms of prioritizing the interventions that may be required on a post-wildfire landscape. So we can explain, the validity of Indigenous knowledge, but we're not going to win everybody that way. But we can also then show them, language they understand and be bridgers of understanding. And I think that's something I really try to do, is bring people on side and show them in a way that they understand. And I think that that's one way we've been successful.
A question from Daniela. How do these Indigenous communities traditionally pass down this knowledge? Thanks for the talk. Super fascinating.
Yeah, thanks, Daniela. It depends on the community. There are different approaches, protocols, customs associated with that. And as someone who works with a number of different communities, I've watched this happen in different ways, and like, not all knowledge is open to everybody, so like there are communities that I work in where, there's elders will tell everybody different things about, or, the same things about plants, but then there's a few specific things that they maybe will tell me to hold on to that, that doesn't go to everybody because it should be within plant knowledge keepers, but it's oral transmission, it's interest, it's being with people, like I don't know why I'm like super intimidated often by elders. And one of our elders was like, anytime you want to go out, just call me. And I was like, "Ugh," like also calling on a phone these days, like that's so scary. But then I called her up and I was like, okay, I'm coming up there, like, let's go. And we had the most beautiful, wonderful day. And I said to her, and she was so glad that we were out. And I was why are you so happy that we're out? And she's like, because nobody's interested in this, and all she wanted to do was pass that information out. So I think it's also like those who express their interest, and this is where I'm saying, like, who are the knowledge keepers today, is like telling kids, like, you can be a plant knowledge keeper, so that they know, like, oh, I should ask so and so because they know about it, because I need to have that information. So yeah, it's not that necessarily that formal, right? It's just that expression of interest, and those oral traditions.
From David, great talk. We agree. Related to a previous question, what's happening to raise awareness of indigenous names of plants? Is there or should there be? And I think we can guess maybe your answer, an effort to get some of these indigenous names into field guides or platforms like, but not limited to, say, iNaturalist.
Yeah, it's funny. In the last year, become engaged in our language fluency program, like not just for our nation, but for some of the neighboring nations. There's like an interior Salish language program at UBC Okanagan. And I think my answer to this would have been different before, which is like, yeah, of course, like, we should get to know the names of the plants, and that's just respectful. These are the plant relations of the people of these lands, and this whole renaming thing becomes weird and contentious when we right now have like our understanding of like plant nativeness comes from like the origins of like British flora, like, so like how we've named them. Yeah, it's kind of, to me, feels arbitrary, in terms of how we name something. But what I've really learned in being engaged in our language fluency program is it's more than just the naming. Like, there are different, like, there are varieties of plants that have different, like, we would look at it and we would be like, oh, that's serviceberry, right? But like in our language, there's 6 different words for what someone would look at and categorize as a serviceberry. Why? Well, because they're probably like ecotypes or something like that. We just haven't gotten there yet, right? So I think the reason to do it is to actually be able to deepen our learning of these species that we so often take for granted, right? Because it's native, it belongs, like it's there, right? And I feel like we need to spend more time and find ways to deepen our knowledges. And I think naming is a way to do that, because it's not just like we're doing right now some interpretive signage actually for a garden that I have going at UBC Farm. And some of the things that we're going to add to that is the stewardship, the language that's associated with the stewardship of those plants as well. So it's not just the naming, and that stewardship is teaching us stuff that we didn't even know, like how to pick it, the timing of harvest, all of these things. So I think the language of the original caretaker of those plant relations has a whole lot more to unlock than learning how to say it. And so, I want to see more connection between language and plants, because I never thought, like, again, compartmentalizing being a knowledge keeper. I'm like, well, I'm a plant knowledge keeper. I'm not a language revitalizer, but now I'm with the language people all the time, and I sit and learn Inkokatmikchin every single morning, because the greatest source of knowledge that I've been gaining recently about caring for our lands is coming from the language.
Folks, we've got time for about one more question, which is good because we've got one more question left in the chat. It comes from Jamie. Thank you for sharing. In your book, which was transformational for me, you wrote community and healing the land go together. We are the land, we heal ourselves, we heal the land. Could you expand on an experience of this, particularly in light of any crises in our communities, including the mental health crisis?
Oh, ooh, that's a big last question. Thank you, Jamie. I think anytime you are out on land alongside people, doing something that you both care about, the walls sort of come down and you hear people's personal stories. And I think the greatest gift of my life the last couple of years is spending time with land guardians, um, who, didn't necessarily take an environmental sciences degree or anything, right? There are multiple walks of life that have led people into the land guardian programs. And as a result of that, caring for land, getting to know the land, strengthening relationships between people and place. I hear so many very personal stories of how that has saved people's lives. How their work is also saving the lives of the next generation through the engagement and work. So like, it's so strange to me when I see things like health separated from, ecological restoration. Like, the more we get people out on land and in relation, the healthier they are. There's science that supports that, but I think that, these land guardian programs, yeah, there's just a richness. I don't want to go into personal stories or things like that, but I can see like it's a connection. I think we're all looking for belonging. Maybe this is a good way to close, but we're all in search of belonging, whether we're Indigenous or not. I see this all the time, and I think that caring for something is an amazing way to create that opportunity, and to bring unsuspecting allies and different people from different walks of life together around this common love and cause and purpose, that we're all looking for. And so I think this is also why, I'm encouraging my students, like, find community with your friends, like, claim a piece of land in some way and work together on it, because we know all the scientific things like phytogens from the trees are good for us and they help us with our, mental well-being, but it's that connection, it's that commitment, it's that purpose. I think that if we spent more time focusing on that health aspect and that community and purpose, we wouldn't have such a hard time finding volunteers, for the park that we manage and things like that, if we could just focus more on building community around those things.
Folks, Dr. Jennifer Grenz is an award-winning author, scientist, historical ecologist, and all-around relational being. We're very glad to be able to learn from you today, Dr. Grenz. Hoping to see many of you at our annual conference later on in May. For those that are looking to join a new group of friends that they might not have known about, please feel free to check out the society.
Can I interrupt? Can I interrupt you?
Yes, please.
Because you plugged me, but now I get to plug you. The conference that we went to last year, that you guys are the very best at connecting grad students together and creating community among people. Oh, geez.
All species welcome.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. We're in real space here, real time, real puppies. So I'll just, sorry, but yes, like, if people are looking for community of like-minded people and opportunities for young people, like, wow. So keep up the great work with that.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Dr. Grenz, very much. And if we don't see you at this next conference, everyone on this call, we hope to see you later on. Have a wonderful rest of your day and of your week, folks. And wherever you are, we hope that you're out doing somewhere and making some great relationships with people and other living beings.